Hey, I'm Scott Perdue, and this is update number 1 from Osh23. We're out here with the airplane Charlies on the north side in the North 40. We're just across from the Weeks hangar, and you can see the Wedge here is behind me. I've got Dennis Kreider here with me. I've been looking for him for a year and a half because he's the guy that's responsible for this, and I think it's an incredible aerodynamic device. And hopefully you've seen my video on it. If you haven't, go look at it. I'll put a link below. But anyway, Dennis, tell me how you came up with this idea.
Well, actually, the inspiration was from my boss's boss, Bill Schultz. He had read a report from NASA. They had an outboard cuff that they had put on they were testing a Grumman Yankee at the time. And the outboard cuff itself was worth a couple degrees towards stall, but it also produced a vortex. And I thought, well, maybe it's the vortex that's probably the major contributor to the effect here. So of attaching the flow on the outboard section of the wing, I was thinking. So we just started with these vortex generators and came up eventually with that. It was a long iterative process because it's dependent on a couple things. One is that incidence, and you can see it's tilted up at a pretty good angle to generate a pretty strong vortex, and the position on the wing, because outboard of that wing you have, in a normal stall, if you tuft it, you'd find that the stall it's stalled inboard, but the stall stops, outside of the wedge. So you've created an area of damping where you used to have the prime area that was driving the spin, the auto rotation. So that was the theory behind it and what it was doing. And the reason for it started on the B36TC, and then it was applied to the 33C later. The B36, again, was a Bonanza, turbocharged, and it also had extended wingtips, more like a Baron, for to run better at higher altitude, where the turbocharger liked to live. So that airplane, unfortunately, would not pass the FAA requirement for a one-turn recovery from a one-turn spin. So we had to do something about that. We tried several things, and then, as I said, we had the information to our boss, and then went with these looking towards vortex generators to create attachment on the outboard section of the wing, and that indeed worked.
So that's cool. It fixed the problem in the B36TC, and how did it end up on an F-33C?
Well, the F-33C, I arrived at Beach in 1979, and the spin work initially on the B-36 was in very early 80s. But in the late 70s, before my time at Beach, they had tried to develop again the 33C, and it did not pass the spin. It was not recovering. Again, for an acrobatic, you have a 6-turn spin, and you have to recover from that rather than a single turn. A single turn is, to some extent, it's more like to some extent, almost think of it as an incipient spin. It's a spin, but it's not as thoroughly developed, or sometimes it doesn't have to be as thoroughly developed as a 6-turn, and where you really wound up and going. So it wouldn't recover, and they put it on the shelf for a while because, they didn't know how to fix that. And then when we had the B36TC fixed, somebody down in the front office decided, let's see, we still have this old problem we had. We can sell, this many airplanes. I think it was Mexico, I'm not quite sure, but there was a contract in place if we can fix it. Now, of course, here there's a total different problem because the wedges were designed to stop spins. For the Bonanza F-33C, it had to continue. You had to be able to spin, but you had to be able to recover from the spin. So it was more of a balancing act. So we had to iterate several times. This thing was moved in and out and to find the exact position span-wise and the exact strength of the vortex needed to allow the airplane to spin, but at the same time to allow it to recover. So it was really a compromise, and as a result, the airplane, I guess, doesn't really like to spin too well. It'll recover fairly fast, I gather. I've never flown it myself, so that.
Well, it does actually. When you do a spin in this airplane, it's a little bit reluctant to spin. Not too bad to the left, but it's very reluctant to spin to the right. it doesn't want to do it and it'll fight it. But it will spin to the right. But when you do a just let go, you let go of everything, recovery, the airplane will actually recover faster than I can do it on purpose. And what'll end up, though, is a negative. So instead of straight down, it's a bit negative. And you end up losing more altitude that way if you just do a complete hands-off. You can do a shorter or a less altitude loss on purpose than you can in just letting go, but it's incredible. And in the video I did when I tufted the wing and the rudder, what you see is that the stall happens here first. And it's a fairly chaotic, very strong chaotic flow, triangular, or it's kind of a triangular shape over the ailerons. A little bit of the aileron is still flying, and it stalls at the root just after it stalls here. And when it stalls at the root, you get a really interesting result is you get forward flow, reverse flow.
Tufts will do that in
Yeah.
stall, yes.
Yeah, and it's just fascinating. But what happens is the tip out here, the tufts show that's still flying. And that's
Exactly what the wedges do.
Yeah, that's exactly, it fixes that. And what happens is in the outside wing is completely, at least in this wing, is completely flying in a spin, a developed spin. And that's an auto-rotational moment that wants to keep it in the spin. And when you have this much out here developing actual lift, that's enough lift to zero out the auto-rotational moment from that other wing. You don't even need the rudder to stop the yaw. It's really fascinating.
Absolutely, that's exactly what it does. That attachment is just where you need it. That changes the area that was giving you the most, as you said, giving you the most auto rotation to the area that's giving you damping. So it's kind of the beauty of the device.
Yeah, I think it's actually an incredible and incredibly simple aerodynamic device that could fit on just about any airplane. And then this would be, talk about a spin prevent. You know, instead of a training issue, we can solve the issue right here. And I'm a little upset that we don't see it on every airplane out here, frankly.
Well, I've been upset about that. Particularly some that have had spin problems. It's easy to fix. There's some iteration involved,
Right.
But the technology is there. All you have to do is put this one, but you have to figure out exactly how much strength of a vortex you need and where to put it that would optimize for your situation. But it could be certainly applied very broadly. And I've been disappointed it hasn't been.
Yeah, and I'm also, I'm happy to find you and happy to have you come and talk with me about this because you're responsible for this, and I think it's an incredible achievement and needs to be documented. So many people they have no clue what it's for, and they laughingly say it's for writing checks to the AMP. And
I've heard that one.
yeah,
I've heard coffee cup holder, but I've never heard that one.
yeah, it's the check writing shelf, and that's humor and that's funny. But this is truly an amazing aerodynamic device, and I don't think it costs you any in drag in cruise.
Strangely enough, it did not. I didn't know the answer to that question, but when I presented my paper at the SAE conference back in the 80s, they asked that very question. And actually, flight test showed it increased the speed, but it was within the margin of error. So it really, I think neutral is the real answer.
Yeah, you can't really claim it. So that what happened with the F-33 and the E-33Cs, they came without this. And then after your tests, then it became a service bulletin, and the FAA said if you didn't do the service bulletin, then the airplane was no longer in the aerobatic category. Most of the airplanes out there did it, but to my knowledge, there's about 6 that didn't, and the kits are no longer available. So F-33Cs are really rare now, but people don't have one. It isn't one without this wedge. You can't do aerobatics with it, so it really hurts the value, upward of $150,000. So you started this off putting the wedge on it for the B-36TC with the Baron wing and the bigger engine and all that, and then you put it on the F-33C, but it's also in A-36s. Could you tell me about that? How did that work?
Well, in the early 80s, the feeling at Beach was let's upgrade with a newer, bigger engine. That newer, bigger engine was heavier and changed the inertial characteristics. So there's one factor besides the aerodynamics that we've talked about here is the inertia is important to the spin characteristics. So you change there was that inertia, it just pushed it over the limit, so we can no longer recover one turn from a one-turn spin. So, and hence putting the technology again of putting this device on the outboard wingtip. So now, you know, the A36 or the G36 now is a very spin-resistant airplane. It just does not. I mean, it'll do. I remember the test. It'll do something like that. You know, just resisting the motion, resisting the stall, spin. Doesn't want to enter a spin at all. In most cases. Now, in some cases, you know, it's a little bit. You know, it varies where you are. AFCG, not good. Certain control inputs, you know, could get you in a worse situation. I'm not going to mention those here.
Yeah.
You don't want to give anybody any ideas.
Right. Yeah.
So, but that was it, and it was obviously been successful, and you know, in that program, I don't have anything else to say on it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. So, was there any talk in the factory at that point about maybe a retrofit kit for earlier airplanes?
I don't think there was. If there was, I wasn't party to it. Again, I was a very junior engineer. You know, I started in '79. This happened in the very early '80s, so I had only, you know, this was over 40 years ago. So I don't think they would have included me in those discussions on art marketing at all. So I didn't have no idea.
Yeah, I understand. So how far inboard did you come for the F-33C from the B-36?
If anything, I think it probably is further outboard.
Outboard.
I can't remember. Again, this is 40 years ago.
Yeah.
I suppose we can go over to that A36 down the way and see.
Yeah, that's true. We could look at that. So do you think that the A36 is the same as this or the B-36?
Well, and again, it's a different position. This was iterated to get that combination, whereas on the A36 and the B-36TC, we were trying to keep it out of a spin situation altogether. So a totally different thing. This was a much more complicated task.
Yeah.
You know, doing that.
Yeah, to not only prevent the spin, but to allow it to spin and then recover faster. It's a go around. Well, thank you so much for agreeing to talk with me, and we tell the story of the check writing shelf. So many people misunderstand what this is about. I think it's so important, but I think it's incredible, and I'm really happy that you get the credit for it because it's an incredible idea and a follow-up.
I'm very happy that you took the 1.5 years and actually finally found me. I'm glad to talk about it. I do remember this as a highlight of my career, and I'm very happy that it, you know, I believe it's really, you know, I think it saved some lives. You know, it's made a very safe airplane.
I agree with you. I think it has. Well, there you have it. That's what the shelf is all about, what the wedge is. I get it all the time. I got it 6 times when I landed here this time. What's all this about? This is not an A36, but that's the story. You heard it firsthand. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on FlyWire.